Good morning, Skallywags, and welcome back to the best movies never made. In case you missed last week's episode, you're going to want to go back and watch that one first because this is actually the second half of the movie, and if you don't want to be lost, you might want to see that one first. We are discussing A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, the Wes Craven version. You see, after the success of A Nightmare on Elm Street, New Line Cinema obviously wanted to continue the franchise, so A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 was rushed into production. Without Wes Craven on board, of course, we got the movie that we got, which didn't make a lot of fans or critics very happy. But it still did pretty well on the box office, so a part 3 was inevitable. But not wanting to have the same kind of failure, New Line reached back out to Wes Craven and said, hey, why don't you come back? You can write the script, you can direct, you can do whatever you want, and we'll have another success on our hands. And Wes Craven agreed. Now, overall, the script that he wrote is very similar to what we would end up getting in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, except it's way darker, way more violent, way more vulgar, and it has my favorite Freddy kill of all time, and it's truly sad because it never got filmed, and probably never will. But anyway, in case you missed last week's episode, definitely go back and check that out because we don't want you to be completely lost because we stopped halfway through. But a quick little recap is that there's a small ranch house out in the middle of nowhere that is essentially Freddy's home. It's where he was born. Freddy is the house. And the house is also the entrance to his nightmare. So in order to stop Freddy, they have to burn him in the house. When we left off, Kirsten, who is Kristen, except she's called Kirsten in this movie, and Nancy had just pulled Kincaid into the dream to help them fight off Freddy. After being attacked, Freddy has come back at them. He's twice as big, twice as tall, with claws twice as long. And he had just swiped and cut Kirsten's arm really deeply. So Freddy's coming at them. Nancy and Kincaid, they pick Kirsten up and they take off running. Nancy reaches over, slaps the crap out of Kincaid, which of course will wake him up, and all three of them come spilling back out of the chair that Kincaid had been sucked into when the dream began. Put yourself in Joey's shoes here for a moment as he's sitting around going, okay, I just watched my roommate get sucked into that chair and now 3 people are coming out. What is going on? Right down the hall, Max and Dr. Madalena, of course, they hear all this commotion, so they come down to see what's going on. They burst into the room and Dr. Madalena is like, okay, first of all, Kirsten, why are you back here? Secondly, why are you bleeding all over the place? And third, for like the 500th time, Nancy, you don't work here. Why are you here? Do we need to admit you? Get out! And we immediately cut to a scene of Nancy walking away, but she's carrying a suitcase, which she was staying at Neil's house, not at the hospital. So why is she stealing stuff from the hospital? Is that what's going on here? Neil sees her leaving, so of course he comes running out because he's all smitten with her and whatnot. He's like, look, I don't know what happened last night, but I know it's not your fault. And she's just like, well, can you just give me a ride to the bus station? We'll call this what it is and just let it go. But instead of going to the bus station, Neil actually drives her back to his house because he's a schmarmy douchebag. And because this is an 80s movie, this of course leads to the most awkward sex scene possibly in never-made movie history. Complete with Nancy crying through the whole thing, and followed by a conversation about suicide. You know, romantic stuff. Nancy flat out says that the only reason that she hasn't killed herself is because she's not so sure that Freddy would leave her alone even if she's dead. And Neil's response is, you know, you probably shouldn't tell anybody else about Freddy. Which, we know he's a schmarmy douchebag, but really, that's what you're going with? Okay. And Nancy's just like, so you do think I'm crazy? He just completely ignores the question and kisses her, and they go back to bed, presumably for more awkward crying, suicide talking sex. Like I said, awkward. Later that night, Nancy wakes up to a sound of water dripping somewhere off in the distance, so she goes off to investigate. Here you basically get your stereotypical scene. You know, there's blood dripping from the faucet, but she turns it off and it immediately starts gushing from the bathtub. Suddenly, Nancy sees the bloody faces of Jennifer and Philip and the hitchhiker girl kind of pressing up against the shower curtain. And she hears a voice saying, "Kill him, Nancy. Kill him before he kills us all." The shower curtain kind of slowly starts pulling back, and it makes the exact same sound as Freddy's glove does whenever he scrapes it along a bunch of pipes or something. But Nancy wakes up and she looks over at Neil and immediately says, I gotta talk to my dad. So Nancy goes back, she's talking to her dad again, and he says, you know, you can't fight him alone. I think that Kirsten is the key to this. He explains how all of these kids came from all across the country, and the reason why they ended up here is because they are the Dream Warriors who were meant to fight Freddy, and that the reason that Nancy's been brought here is so that she can lead them. He reveals to her that he's actually stolen Max's master key, so they use that to escape, and they're sneaking down the hallway. Well, meanwhile, Dr. Madalena and Neil, they've got all the kids together for a big group session. The doctors are trying to get the kids to talk about what's going on, but nobody wants to talk, and everybody's sitting there, they're all bummed out, you know, looking like this. Suddenly, Nancy comes bursting into the room, and everybody gets happy! Yay! Don't worry, Dr. Madalena actually walked out right before that happened, so she doesn't see them, so we don't have any more conflict at this moment. So without even saying anything, Nancy just walks in, she lays down on the floor, and without even questioning that, everybody just gets up and joins her, and they've got all their heads together, kind of like a star pattern sort of thing. That is, of course, everyone except for Neil, who is, of course, ever the skeptic, even though half the stuff that he has seen through the course of this movie should have made him otherwise by now. Nancy gives Kirsten the word, and everybody just vanishes, and Neil is still sitting there scratching his head like, what's going on here, as if he hasn't figured it out over the course of this entire film. Suddenly, the group appears on a hillside just outside of the hospital, and they're looking down on the hospital. It says that everybody feels very powerful now, and all of their tics are gone. It says that Joey can even talk now, which I swear to God, I know he couldn't in the movie, but I swear earlier on in this script, he had a few lines of dialogue. So the fact that he couldn't talk and now he can, I don't know. We'll just say that he can talk now. Okay.
Did I say that?
Kincaid says he feels like he's actually waited his entire life just to stand on this hillside. And Nancy says that they're all powerful. They're all warriors. And cue the music! Nancy tells the group about Freddy and the fact that he's the one that's actually tried to kill them. They didn't try to kill themselves. They, in fact, weren't crazy. And the reason why none of them can remember Freddy is because their minds had blocked him from their minds until their minds were ready to accept what they were. X plus 14 equals... yeah. John goes on to explain the whole Dream Warrior thing and says that that's why they were able to survive where so many other people died. And that's why they were screw-ups in their life, which is exactly what you want to hear. And why they have strength in their dreams. Because this is where they shine. This is their home. Nancy explains that they all have to go after Freddy together. She explains that any one of them alone, Freddy would be unstoppable. But with two of them, with Nancy and Kirsten, they were able to run away. We brought in Kincaid and we knocked Freddy on his ass. Just imagine what we can do with the whole group together. Go team! Kirsten asks, well, how do we get back to Freddy's house? And a door suddenly appears behind them, just kind of floating in thin air. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, the cops have arrived and they're questioning Neil and Dr. Madalena and Max and everybody. You know, where did everybody go? Dr. Madalena, of course, being the ever so pleasant human being that she is, she talks about how the girl and the blind psychopath had stolen a master key from one of our orderlies and used it to escape. Well, do you know where she might have gone to with them? Well, why don't you ask Neil? He knows her, if you know what I mean. And everybody just kind of glares at Neil and everyone stands there silently, kind of like you do in the movies, you know, those awkward scenes where everyone's just kind of looking and it's like, you know, what, is somebody gonna say something? Back up on the hilltop, the door swings open, but there's fire coming from the other side. Taryn says, oh, it's just a trick, and she just goes running into the fire screaming like a banshee. She yells back, says, hey, everything's cool, and everybody else starts pouring in after her. Everyone except John. And this is another one of those moments in the script that are rather confusing as far as some of the choices that they made, but yeah. John explains that he can't go with them because he's all used up. He says, I don't fully understand what happens next, but I know what I have to do, and I'll get Freddy. And then he jumps into the fire and starts screaming bloody murder, and you just hear his voice kind of fade out forever. So I guess he showed Freddy by killing himself, I guess. Anyway, Nancy jumps in screaming, Krueger! And the door disappears. Back at the hospital, Madalena is just kind of grilling Neil over what happened, and Neil's trying to explain to her, you know, I swear they all just kind of vanished. I don't know what happened. Of course, she doesn't believe him. And then suddenly, John's burning body just kind of falls to the ground right there next to them. Oh, so I guess that's what happened a second ago. Still doesn't make sense, but okay. Madalena, still ever the skeptic, doesn't believe, you know, any of this. She just thinks, oh, he ran up from somewhere or something, and he didn't just materialize out of thin air. John, in his dying breath, whispers up to Neil that Nancy and the kids have gone to fight Freddy, and that he has to join them at the ranch house. Just go there. It'll all make sense. Just go there. And he dies at Neil's feet. Speaking of the ranch house, we actually cut back to the ranch house, and we see that everyone is throwing gas everywhere. They're about to burn the place down, so they got gasoline just going over everything. Nancy strikes a match, but nothing will burn. Like nothing. Like throw it right on the gas. Nothing. Laredo says that you have to burn the wizard himself. Nerd. So they whip up a bunch of Molotov cocktails like you do, and they all start going off looking for Freddy. They say that they need to stick together because this is a horror movie. So of course you're gonna stick together. So immediately Taryn hears a voice calling her from halfway down the stairs, and she turns around and she's like, Grandma? And she goes down to investigate, leaving the rest of the group continuing upwards. And she backtracks down to the bottom of the stairs, and she rounds the corner, and she finds herself in her grandma's apartment. Right there in the middle of the room is her grandmother, so she sits down her Molotov cocktail and runs over like, Grandma, because this is normal. And the grandma says, oh, you know, Taryn, we were so worried after you ran away. And Taryn says, well, I didn't run away. I just woke up and I was somewhere else. But it's okay, I'm here now. Oh, you know, Taryn, lay your head down on my lap. And she does. And then Freddy's voice kind of starts booming from the grandmother and says something that I'm not comfortable saying on camera. It was a different time, I guess. And then the grandmother's entire body splits open, revealing just like a giant gaping maw of a mouth with Freddy's head inside of it. Somehow it doesn't really explain it very well. It's like a mouth with Freddy's head on it. I don't know. He shoves Taryn inside the mouth and says, you were always so hard to stomach, which I love that line. That's great. Classic Freddy. But once she's almost all the way in, it gets to a point where there's just kind of a foot sticking out. It says that Freddy gets impatient and like chomps off the foot, or cuts off the foot, I guess, rather, with his claws, and then just chucks it down the hallway, which is fantastic. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Joey walks into a room and starts kind of pouring gas everywhere. So I guess we've abandoned that whole stick together plan already. Right as he kind of strikes the match, he's been like mouthing Freddy this whole time, you know, wherever he may be, you know, I'll get you, son of a... Lights the match. Suddenly the room turns very pink and girly. That's just how the script describes it, guys, not my words here. And there's a girl that's in lingerie lying on the bed, which is, I guess, obviously sort of a callback to the nurse scene from Nightmare 3. She asks if Joey remembers her and says that her name is Beth. And Joey says, of course I remember you. You're the one that used to make fun of me. She, of course, gives a line like, you know, well, you've certainly changed and so am I. Look at you. You're so sexy now. And she starts kind of walking, you know, sauntering over to Joey slowly while the door starts closing behind him. They start making out and Joey falls back onto the bed, which obviously is now all like gross and, you know, dilapidated and green and red sheets and stuff like that. And it's actually the posts of the bed that wraps around Joey's arms. It's not little tongues, which that's one change that they made for the one we got that I think is actually better. The tongues were just, that was cool. Then Freddy's head comes out of the headboard. It says that the bed is Freddy, and it starts stretching him like a rubber band until he just snaps in half. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us a cool Freddy line here, which made me kind of sad, but still kind of a cool death. Meanwhile, downstairs, Neil finally shows up and he walks in through the door. And in one of the best show don't tell, but then tell us anyway moments that has ever existed, he yawns and like this blue fog comes out of his mouth. And the script says that that is a way of showing us that he has officially entered the dream. But since audiences are dumb, he then smiles and picks up a pair of scissors that he randomly finds on the floor and cuts his finger off. Then he picks up the finger, sticks it back on his hand, and he's like, huh, I'm in the dream now. You could have just stuck with the blue fog. I think we would have probably understood. I did that video a while back about how, you know, the importance of show don't tell, so I hate this scene with a passion. So let's move on, shall we? Anyway, he hears a crash somewhere and he yells for Nancy and goes off running for it. He trips over the gas can on his way out. And we cut to Nancy, who's elsewhere yet again, and she's walking around and she's yelling for Taryn and Joey and trying to find everybody. And I love how they're all walking as a group with the importance of sticking together. One person splits off and now everyone is on their own. We don't get to see how that happened or why that happened, but it just happened. So not getting a response from Joey or from Taryn, you know, because they're very dead at this point, she decides to call out for Freddy, who immediately appears behind her. She throws her Molotov cocktail at him, but he ducks out of the way and it smashes against the wall behind him. Suddenly Neil shows up. So you're like, okay, great, you know, let's do this. Everybody's here now. But no, they get into an argument about why he shouldn't be here. What? Neil's like, yeah, well, you know, your dad sent me. I guess Freddy is just kind of just standing there this whole time. Maybe he's like, no, if I let this go long enough, they'll kill each other. But finally, the movie remembers that Freddy is there, and he takes a swing at Neil. But unfortunately, Nancy pulls him out of the way, and they take off running. But instead of chasing them, there is something wonderful that happens here. So I mentioned she throws a Molotov cocktail, and Freddy ducked it, causing it to hit the wall behind him. Well, when you throw a Molotov cocktail, whatever it hits kind of bursts into flames. So that portion of the house is now burning. So instead of chasing them, Freddy actually stays behind and starts spraying water from his mouth like a fire hydrant to put the fire out. Which just take a second and picture that. Instead of chasing Nancy Thompson, his supposed arch nemesis in this series, Freddy gets freaked out by a fire and stays behind to extinguish it by spraying water from his mouth like a fire hydrant. This script is absolutely nuts and I love it, and it's about to get even more nuts, so let's get back to it. We cut back over to Laredo, who is now walking down this wet staircase. He's got a torch in one hand and what is only described as a D&D sword in the other, and I like to picture, I don't know what they mean by D&D sword, so I like to picture that he's like carrying a boffer weapon, which is just gonna make this next scene 1,000 times more hilarious if you do the same. So he's walking and suddenly he hears this little boy talking behind him. He turns around and there's a kid. He's sitting there wearing a pair of red and green swimsuit and says that his name is Toby, Laredo's little brother. And since this is an 80s horror movie, of course, Toby drowned when he was young because Laredo wasn't watching him because he was too busy talking on the phone. You guys remember talking on the phone? Those were the good days. Laredo explains that the call was the wrong number and he was only gone for a second. Toby says, well, it only took a second for me to die, but if you hold me, it'll be okay. You can still save me. This isn't a trap. Laredo moves in to hug his brother, but just as he gets to him, he kicks him in the balls. Which, of course, causes Toby to turn back into Freddy, because, let's face it, we all knew that that's what's going to happen. We're not dumb. And he crashes into the wall behind him, howling in pain, because Wolfman's got nards, and so does Freddy.
My name is Horace.
Now this scene is actually pretty cool. So Laredo, he's like, oh, you thought you were clever, huh? Shape changing? Well, I can do that too. And he turns into a freaking gargoyle. Says he's 10 foot tall with glowing yellow cat eyes, which is very specific, but okay. He takes a swing at Freddy, but then Freddy also shape changes into what the script calls a ragged ass black crow. And he's flying around the room and keeps trying to peck at the gargoyle's eyes. So Laredo changes into a net and captures the crow. But the second that he hits the floor, Freddy just turns into a goo and just kind of slithers out from the net, where he then turns back into Freddy and kind of like hides behind a door, which is, I don't know, it's that visual is just, out of everything we just saw, the visual of Freddy hiding behind a door, that's weird. So feeling very full of himself, thinking that he just beat Freddy, Laredo turns back into himself just for Freddy to jump out from behind the door with a gas-powered post hole digger, which he immediately plunges into Laredo's back, causing Laredo to turn into a blood-red mist that just goes screaming down the hallway. We cut back to Nancy and Neil, and they're somewhere else in the house walking around, and the mist like flies past them and flies on like through a window and into oblivion. Nancy's like, no! And she turns the corner to kind of follow it into the room, but instead of finding the mist, she finds what's left of Joey. It comes popping out at them like a rubber band, so they jump back and actually trip over Taryn's foot and turn around to see what the script says. They turn again, only running into what is left of Taryn herself. And this may be the best description of a thing ever. Nothing more than a lurching mound of guts and terror. So they turn to run again, and they run into another room where they run into Kirsten and Kincaid. And I just said run into several times over in a single sentence, so let's pretend that didn't happen. And they explain that everyone else is either dead or a lurching mound of guts and terror, just in time for Freddy to pop up from behind them and, like, take a swipe. But Kincaid hawks a loogie and spits it into Freddy's eye, which causes Freddy to kind of stumble back, like disgusted. Freddy's grossed out by loogies in this movie, guys. I don't know what is happening. It's like my whole world is shattered. It's like my brain is becoming a lurching mound of guts and terror. Kincaid then kicks Freddy in the stomach, which sends Freddy flying all the way down to the end of the hallway. So Nancy's like, now, throw your bombs, now! So they all throw their Molotov cocktails that they're still carrying around, I guess. And it kind of hides Freddy behind this wall of flame. But the flames are spreading, and it's kind of pushing back towards them in the hallway. And suddenly they find themselves, they're like backed up against a wall with no doors. So Nancy tells Kirsten, you know, it's up to you. You got to get us out of here. Just think of someplace, any place, someplace safe, someplace that you know. And just as the fire engulfs the area where our group was just standing, they all vanish. The end. Well, what'd you think, guys? Oh, no, we're not done yet. Hard cut to Kirsten's house where her parents are throwing this big fancy shindig. You know, got all these rich people standing around. These are 80s rich people, so you know it's like the highest of class cocaine and, wine and that. Sure, you know what I mean. Right? Kirsten's mom, meanwhile, she's actually on the phone with Dr. Madalena. And in typical 80s Mother of the Year fashion, Kirsten's mom is like, no, I did hear about the breakout, and no, I don't know where she is, and no, it's not my responsibility to know where she is, and even if she shows up here, she's not stepping 1 foot inside. Which, of course, is the exact moment where the entire group comes falling from the ceiling, smashing through a glass coffee table. Glass starts flying everywhere, guests are screaming, Kirsten's dad runs over and he's, what the hell do you think you're doing? And Kirsten's mom starts pulling a Karen on Neil, saying, you know, you're gonna lose your license over this. Neil just completely ignores Kirsten's mom. He looks over at Nancy and he's like, what's wrong? Nancy's like white as a sheet and she's like, Kruger's still alive and he's here. So you remember earlier when I said that it was gonna get nuts pretty soon? Welcome to pretty soon. Freddy erupts through the floor and he is pissed. He takes a swing at Kirsten, but Kirsten jumps out of the way just in time, and Freddy ends up hitting Kirsten's mom, slicing her stomach open. So she's sitting there looking at her guts spilling out onto the floor, and everybody starts screaming. And that is when this happens. Looking down in horror at her own guts ballooning up through the wound, staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. Then Freddy buries his head in them, tearing them from her in thick strings like a mad vulture. She screams horribly as her bowels are devoured. Freddy starts eating her guts right in front of all of her fancy house guests. And why didn't we get this movie made? After a minute or two, Freddy looks up and he points at Kirsten and he says, next. And the group takes off running. They run into Kirsten's dad's trophy room. It's filled with, you know, various game and animal heads hanging on the wall, that type of stuff. And she opens this hidden panel which shows her dad's gun collection. Well, Kincaid walks over and he finds an AR-14 and he's like, oh, I always wanted one of these. I don't know why he sounded like he was from the deep south there. Oh, I always wanted one of these, I tell you what. Anyway, Freddy comes bursting through the door and Kincaid opens fire, sends Freddy flying back yet again. Blood starts pouring out from all the bullet holes and stuff. Neil yells for everyone to link hands, saying that he's actually thinking of a place. Freddy gets back up and comes barreling through what's left of the door, takes a swipe at the group just as they all disappear again, leaving Freddy there just kind of swiping it, you know, at nothing out of frustration. Cut back to the hospital where you got Dr. Madalena. She's walking down the hall, checking all the doors, making sure everything's locked. Suddenly the group comes pouring through the wall behind her. So she's, you know, snaps around. And right before she can ask what's going on, we hear Kincaid yelling for help. So you remember me telling you how this has my favorite Freddy kill ever. This is that moment. So everyone turns to see why Kincaid is yelling for help, only to find him sticking halfway out of the wall, from like the waist up. The rest of him, his legs, are still stuck at Kirsten's house. So everybody starts pulling on him, trying to pull him on through. They even get Dr. Madalena in there. She's even trying to help pull him through. But not only is he not coming through, but he starts screaming horribly because Freddy is entering him from the other end. Freddy reaches in through Kincaid's butt and his glove comes out of Kincaid's mouth and starts swinging around at everybody. Realizing he's not hitting anybody, the arm pulls back and Kincaid's body just kind of gets cut off there at the wall and slumps to the ground. Now, I admit, the first time I read this was like a year and a half ago or something like that. And for whatever reason, I could have sworn that Freddy actually crawled through him entirely. So when I first started doing the review, I was like, oh God, my favorite kill, not realizing that it was just his arm that went through Kincaid, thinking that it was all of him that went through Kincaid, which would have been even 1,000 times better. But still, reaching in through someone's butt and out of his mouth to kill people on the other end of a person is just beautiful. And God, I wish they would have used that, even if it wasn't in part 3, anywhere. I love Kincaid, but good God, man, did you get the best kill out of everybody. Anyway, Freddy comes on through the wall. His head turns into like a crocodile, and he bites off Dr. Madalena's head, while the rest of the group is running away again. There's a lot of running and knocking Freddy back in this movie. That's probably my one complaint with it. So you know how in part 2, how Freddy kind of comes out of the dream by using Jesse's body and everything, and so people said that, you know, it kind of was breaking the rules because he wasn't in the dream anymore? Well, if they had done this, that would have made sense. Because Neil actually asks Nancy, you know, are we in reality or are we still in the dream? And she actually says that at this point, it doesn't matter anymore. That Freddy just kind of exists at this point. And it's all because of that house. So nothing makes a difference. Anyway, they run to the end of the hall to this big metal door. Slamming the big metal door in Freddy's face right as he gets to it. Again, knocking him back. And they run down this big concrete stairwell until they find this teeny tiny little wooden door at the bottom. They go through the little door and they find themselves back at the ranch house in the basement. So they start to run upstairs, but they find the entire house is engulfed in flames. So they're forced to run back downstairs just as Freddy comes ripping through the little wooden door. Neil, with admittedly a good idea in thought, starts trudging towards Freddy saying, this is my dream and no one's allowed in my dream unless I let them in. But Freddy just says, I'm not interested in you, and kind of like Mr. Fantastic's his arm halfway across the room and just bitch slaps him across the room, and Neil's unconscious. Kirsten and Neil, they're backing away from Freddy and they accidentally fall into this coal chute, popping out at the other end onto a pile of like raggedy clothes, and they're in the original boiler room, like where Freddy would take all of his victims when he was alive and everything, like the boiler room. Nancy explains, you know, this is where it began. This is where he took all of his kids. Freddy steps out from behind the boiler, bathed in red light, and has one of those wonderful Freddy lines. Now, this is kind of the perfect time where I mentioned before how it's like a Nightmare on Elm Street 3, but with the tone of a Nightmare on Elm Street 1. This line of Freddy's really shows what I mean by that. So he steps out from behind the boiler. You got all this beautiful red light kind of washing over him, and he says, "Welcome home, Nancy. You too, you juicy little bitch." That's as good of a Freddy impression as I can do. I'm sorry. I never said it was good. So Kirsten like picks up a pipe, but Freddy just immediately swats it away. But then Nancy suddenly remembers, wait, this isn't how you beat Freddy. Kirsten, turn your back on him. So they both turn away from him, and Nancy kind of starts repeating her speech from the end of part 1. And believe it or not, this works. Freddy starts to kind of recoil away from them, and his body starts smoking. He looks afraid for the first time. It actually says that in the script. Smoke starts pouring off of him, and eventually he bursts into flames, and finally even collapses into just a charred lump of Freddy. And for a moment, it looks like everything's good. Nancy walks over to Freddy's little work table that we saw in the opening credits of Nightmare on Elm Street 1. She picks up the blade from one of the earlier incarnations of the glove, and then suddenly she starts hearing a voice behind her. Not a Freddy, but it's her dad again. He says, you know, you've done it, baby. You've beaten him. And he opens his arms for her to come give him a big hug. And she runs over, but right as she gets to his arm, she stabs him. Not falling for it, not this time. So she stabs him right in the chest. Unfortunately, at the exact same time, Freddy's glove stabs her. The script says that they stagger in a bit of a death dance, which I love that little description thing there. And then she actually pulls the skin away from his face and reveals that it is, in fact, Freddy. But they both fall to the ground, and Freddy starts screaming as he kind of dissolves and fades away. Basically taking his power away again had actually worked for the second time. Kirsten runs over and she grabs hold hold of Nancy, and she's holding her and kind of cradling her in her arms, and she keeps looking over saying, I don't know if Freddy's dead yet. And Nancy says, his house is burning, his power is fading, he's dying, I can feel it. She tries to say something else, but she doesn't have the energy to speak, so she whispers something into Kirsten's ear, and Kirsten just kind of nods and says, yes, I'll do it. We harken back to that Nightmare on Elm Street 3 scene, because she says, you know, you can count on me, I'll do it. I'll dream you into a beautiful dream forever and ever.
I'm gonna dream you into a beautiful dream forever and ever.
And Nancy kind of fades away. So now Nancy and Freddy both are kind of faded off into thin air, leaving Kirsten there by herself. So she grabs what's left of the glove, the blades from it, and kind of like wraps a rag around it, kind of fashioning it into a knife. She somehow gets back to the basement, and she drags Neil up the cellar stairs and kind of gets him away from the house and lays him down, and she's just kind of laying there on the ground herself, looking back at the house as it's just, you know, full on burning at this point. And then it says that the flames turn into phantom flames. I don't know what that means, but that the house suddenly starts to look newer. And it keeps this little process going until it looks just like it did way back at the very first scene of the entire movie. Kirsten gets this wonderful defiant look on her face. It's like, oh, hell no. Gets up and starts trudging towards the house. Meanwhile, inside, we hear the opening scene, basically, with a woman screaming, followed by a horrific infant wailing afterwards. Kirsten walks inside. The place is fully furnished, looks brand new, filled with, you know, furniture from the 40s. There's a radio playing, all this stuff, and you can hear all this noise going on upstairs. But then right as the woman dies, everything goes silent. Kirsten walks upstairs and into the bedroom where she sees this just bloody mess of a bed, and she pulls the knife out of her pocket and she's holding it above her head, and she rips the sheets back just to show nothing but a pool of blood. There's no body there, just this pool of blood with bubbles coming up every so often. She reaches down to touch the blood, and this teeny tiny little razor clawed hand comes up and grabs her by the wrist and starts trying to pull her down into the bed. And they're wrestling back and forth. Kirsten keeps fighting back until finally she pulls the little cute infant Freddy from earlier out of the bed. As far as what the baby looks like, I'm guessing it probably, this is all used for the dream child, obviously, but the script describes it as, even as an infant, it looks old and wise, strange, mysterious, and grotesque. Yeah. Kirsten rips the baby out of the bed, she slams it against the wall, and the baby starts laughing. And the script actually says that we don't know if this laughter is like from humor or pain, but it finally lets go of her wrist, and she stabs it with the glove, and it falls dead to the floor. And I guess that's pretty much it. We fade forward, we see Kirsten and Neil, the house is just nothing but smoldering ash at this point, and they're still hanging out there in the yard watching it burn. And after that, we kind of cut forward in time. It's you know, the season has changed. It's Neil's house. We're back at Neil's house. There's a new car in the driveway. Neil says that Neil is looking thinner and a little more weary now, but Kirsten looks fantastic. Her hair's a little shorter. She looks better. They're talking. Kirsten says that she did end up going to the Catholic girls' school and that it actually did her a lot of good. Says that after her mom's death, it kind of ended up being exactly what she needed. She keeps trying to kind of make some small talk, you know, asking if he's still on sabbatical, but Neil's just like, yeah, okay, it was great for you to stop by. And Kirsten's like, oh, is that a hint? And Neil's like, no, I'm just tired. So Kirsten asks, are you still seeing her? And Neil says, we're meeting tonight. That's why I'm so eager to get to bed. So could you, like, you know, take the hint and just go? Kirsten smiles, knowing that Nancy is living on, happy and healthy in Neil's dreams. The creeper guy that she just met a few days ago when her car broke down, who immediately offered her to come live with him, even though he didn't know her and she didn't know him. He called her crazy constantly, and then they had awkward sex once. Congratulations, you now get to live forever in his dream. It truly is a nightmare on Elm Street. Right as Kirsten reaches the door, she kind of stops and looks over and she's like, wasn't that Joey's? And we kind of pan around to see this little guy. It's the little paper mache house. And Neil says, yeah, you know, I was going to throw it out, but I decided to keep it as kind of a memento. Because you want to remember when, you know, everybody died around you in horrific, unimaginable ways. That's something you want to remember for a long time. Anyway, Kirsten, she walks on out. Neil heads upstairs. And just like at the end of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, we pan in on the little paper mache house. And right before the screen cuts to black, we see a little light flicker inside one of the windows, and we hear Freddy's gloves scraping across the metal. And there you have it! Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, what could have been. Less of a quippy horror and more of a straight up, you know, horror sequel to the original Nightmare on Elm Street, kind of in the same tone. It's truly a shame that we never got to see this movie on the big screen, and of course, it is truly a shame that Wes Craven has left us now. But at least he gave us the gift that is Freddy Krueger and A Nightmare on Elm Street before he left us. And we've got wonderful unmade writings just like this one to not only remember and honor Wes Craven, but to, you know, kind of imagine what could have been. And there are plenty more scripts like this one where this one came from. So let me know what unmade gem you would like to see down in the comments below. And we'll do this every week from now on. Yeah, already working on the next one. And it's another horror movie because, well, let's face it, that's where my specialty lies. But as long as you're out here, be sure to check us out across all of our social media. That is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Thinking about starting a TikTok just so I can do some funny stuff on there. Actually, I want to make a TikTok that is specifically mocking popular TikTok trends. I don't know. What do you think? Should I do it? No? Yes? Maybe? I don't know. Possibly? Let me know. Also, while you're out here on the internet, please hop over to www.geekycool.com. It is your one-stop shop for all things nerd. We have partnered up with them for quite a while now. You can find articles, news, trailers, top 10 lists. Basically, if it's a nerd thing, games, movies, comics, you name it, it's on there somewhere. They also have a live broadcast that they do every Tuesday evening. I'm on there quite a bit, so definitely check that out. They have a YouTube channel as well. Again, that is www.geekycool.com. Tell them we sent you. But that is going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have 5 shows a week here on Skallywag Productions again, so check all of those out. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any of that. And next Wednesday, we will be back with another unmade gem. So thanks for watching. We'll see you then.